had come down from heaven, and he had a very unfortunate name of Moroni, and that he appeared to Joseph Smith and revealed this new religion. And so I decided I was going to give up hope on this farm girl, and I prayed, God, did you send an angel to reveal a new religion to the Mormons? And I cranked open the Bible, and I actually intended to bring a Bible with me. I didn't, so let's see if I have this memorized. I opened the Bible to Galatians 1, and Paul says something like, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you by the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel, not that there is another gospel. Even if an angel should come down from heaven and preach to you a gospel other than the one which we gave you, let that person be, my version said, eternally condemned. So, needless to say, I did not become Mormon, but I did have a very deep, new experience with God, and it caused a renewal of my faith. And I quickly joined a campus evangelical ministry called the Navigators. Then, later on, I began to feel a call to become a Protestant minister. So, after graduating from university, I spent a year in a pastoral internship in a Baptist church, and then I enrolled in a seminary in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was a multi-denominational seminary, and when I arrived there, I was kind of provisionally Baptist, but I was actively trying to discern, what would be the best denomination to make my home. Now, around this time, my wife and I got married, and we began to discern whether we should be missionaries. We had a mission agency that we wanted to be involved with, and we were thinking about going to French Africa, to the country of Niger. And both sets of our families were extremely opposed to this idea. They were doing everything possible to stop us from doing this. And after a certain amount of time, we eventually discerned that this is not what we should do, but we still kind of had this missionary desire to be missionaries in our own culture. Now, to be clear, my spiritual journey was an incredibly wandering path. I was involved in at least 7 very different Protestant denominations, and of course not validly from a Catholic point of view. I was baptized twice and confirmed 3 times. The last confirmation was Catholic. Eventually, in my search for truth, I decided to start reading the early fathers of the church. These are the earliest writings right after the New Testament. And my Protestant eyes immediately realized that, boy, these guys look really Catholic. I mean, they had bishops and the Eucharist and a Mass, and they clearly believed in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharistic species. And as a Protestant, I found this extremely disturbing. And my thinking began to undergo a serious shift. And it wasn't so much that I was rejecting everything that I had believed or loved before, but suddenly I was entering into this much, much bigger world. And all the beliefs that I had a new home in this broader horizon of understanding. In response to this shift, by the way, my wife said anything but Catholic, we joined the local Anglican church. And we were there for a while, and not long after that, unfortunately, there was a new bishop elected in our diocese. And he was an activist bishop. He was trying to get people to accept extremely, extremely progressive thinking, especially among his clergy. And this local controversy actually became a news item that went across the world and got all the way to Canterbury, because in the early 1990s, the Anglican Church had not yet embraced this kind of thinking. At this time, I was actually discerning whether to become an Anglican deacon or an Anglican priest. And I could have easily just moved to another diocese and found a suitable bishop who would endorse me. But at this point, with the reading that I'd done and the praying that I'd done, I decided that God wanted me to simply become Catholic. So I let go of any future thought of ordination in the Catholic Church, and my wife and I joined a local RCIA and joined the church in 1995. There was a certain sense of grief in giving up my original vision, but I discovered that the Catholic Church had an extremely rich vision for the dignity of the layperson. And I actually became involved in a group in the church that kind of fostered this lay vocation. Using my background and gifts, I became a Catholic professor as a religion instructor, and eventually I decided to begin doctoral studies, and I went to St. Patrick's College in Ireland. That was an adventure, beginning with the assumption that we spoke English. But so soon after beginning that, I decided to, actually, after midnight one night, I sent my resume somewhere, and the strange place was called Kansas City. And we had no idea where it was. We literally got out a map and went, oh, look, it's in the middle. Surprisingly, they phoned back and flew me down here and interviewed me. And I became the founding director of a new diocesan catechetical institute. And the emphasis was to be on training lay people so that they would use their unique gifts and ministries to bring about holiness in their daily lives and in the midst of the world. And I did that for probably about 11 years. And not wishing to diminish the dignity of the lay vocation, but after 20 years of full-time ministry as a Catholic layperson, I began to feel again that maybe God was calling me to something else. I began to think about the possibility that God might still be calling me to the permanent diaconate. And I wrestled with these thoughts in prayer. I talked to my spiritual director. One of the things that was holding me back, though, was the idea that I had that, and it was a wrong idea, but I thought that the diaconal ministry was totally focused on service to the poor. And I had spent all these years as a catechist and teacher, and I had a passion for evangelization. And so I thought, well, I can't be a deacon because that's not what deacons are. And I also kind of felt this pull in my heart towards the ministry on the altar. But I then began to study what the church said deacons are. And I began to realize that deacons were members of the clergy who received the same 3 sacred powers as priests do, but in a lesser degree and in a different kind. But even though that's true, a lesser degree and a different kind, it says, not unto the priesthood, but unto the ministry of service. When you read Second Vatican Council, it still says that deacons are to serve in the diaconate of the liturgy and of the word and of charity to the people of God. And under the section on the word, it highlights the idea that they could have a catechetical role to instruct and exhort people. And there's another document called the Directory for the Ministry of the Life of the Permanent Deacon, and it highlights the idea that deacons can serve in all 3 of these areas. And it goes on to say, depending on the circumstances, one or other of these areas, that is, the word, the liturgy, or charity, can take on special importance in the individual work of the deacon. So then it suddenly seemed to me, you could focus on one area if that was the area that God had called to you. Now, all through this time, as a former Protestant, my heart had always been to see other people come to understand the fullness of the vision that God had shown me in the church when I became Catholic. And for many, many years, every day, I prayed the words of Jesus' prayer for unity from John 17, that they all may be one. And I was greatly encouraged in 2009 when Pope Benedict suddenly created a new mechanism for unity with the Anglican Church. And in 2009, I worked with some other people to host a conference in Kansas City on Catholic Anglican unity. Now, when Pope Benedict created this, he created something called the Ordinariate, and that won't mean anything to you, so I'll explain a tiny bit. Both Father Randy and I are incarnated into this new structure in the church, and we are actually on loan to our diocese here. And the structure kind of parallels the military ordinariates, which are non-geographic dioceses with their own bishop. In fact, our particular bishop is actually the Bishop of North America, of Canada and the U.S. And these new ordinariate communities would be fully Catholic, yet somehow they would retain a little bit of the Anglican heritage and liturgical practice. And since establishing the ordinariate here in the U.S., the Vatican has gone on to establish one in the United Kingdom in 2011 and Australia in 2012. So I began then to explore my own involvement in the ordinariate, but unfortunately around this time my plans were delayed because my oldest son was diagnosed with brain cancer, and we went through a 2-year-long battle and eventually his death. And after I had some time to recover, I then reconnected with the ordinariate, and I discovered that there were a whole bunch of exciting new changes. Previously, the ordinariate did not have a bishop, but the Holy Father named Bishop Stephen Lopes, who then was very quickly ordained to be the new bishop of the ordinariate. And the Vatican gave the ordinariate a very unique liturgy, which they called the Divine Worship Liturgy. The liturgy is fully in English, but it's kind of a revival of an ancient Sarum rite of the Church, which actually predates Trent. So if you could imagine an ancient liturgy translated by Shakespeare, all in English, that's kind of what it is. So I reached out again to the ordinariate at their chancery office in Houston, and I discovered that my former thesis supervisor from seminary in Vancouver was now a Catholic priest in the ordinariate, and he was actually the vocations director for the ordinariate. So I began to renew this process of discernment and explore if there might be a pathway for me to become a deacon through the ordinariate. And because I was exploring this, I joined the parish that Father Randy was at, where he was leading an ordinariate community. And I joined him on the altar, and we began using the Divine Worship Liturgy. Now, a liturgy like this was a completely new experience for me. And at first, I felt it was very alien. But slowly, I began to appreciate the ancient grandeur and beauty of this liturgy. And I just began to appreciate it very much. And I should probably mention that at this time, I was no way a traditionalist. I had spent 20 years being a Catholic, always worshiping in the ordinary form of the Mass. So I had never experienced anything like this before. Now, one particular and strikingly beautiful part of the Divine Worship Liturgy is a prayer that is said right before the faithful receive communion. It's called the Prayer of Humble Access. And I wanted to just share this one little prayer so you could have a taste of this. It goes like this. We do not presume to come to this thy table, O merciful Lord, trusting in our own righteousness, but in thy manifold and great mercies. We are not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs under thy table. But thou art the same Lord, whose property is always to have mercy. Grant us, therefore, gracious Lord, so to eat the flesh of thy dear Son, Jesus Christ, and to drink his blood, that our sinful bodies may be made clean by his body, and our souls washed through his most precious blood, that we may evermore dwell in him, and he in us. Amen. So I'm very grateful for the trust that Bishop Lopes has shown in ordaining me to the diaconate on July 5th, 2017. And in the words of the ancient divine worship liturgy, it is meet and right so to do. And I will have been a deacon now for 5 years this coming July. And I have seen the Lord take my varied past experiences and training and integrate them into a new vision of life as Christ the servant. And I think an appropriate motto for deacons would be, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." It has been an honor and a great pleasure to serve here at St. Therese for these past 3.5 years, 3.5 years. So I'll open things up to questions now, but I have to warn you, I always tell Father Randy, I am incapable of conspiracy. I have hearing aids. I cannot hear whispering. So if you're going to share a question, you're going to have to share it loudly, and it's even possible that someone's going to have to repeat it for me to hear. But do you have any questions? Yes. Yes. So there's still a very small ordinary community here in Kansas City. Unfortunately, it is not thriving. So how long we'll have it, we're not sure. But yes, there's one Mass on Sundays at 9:30 at Guardian Angels where this Mass is being said. Yeah.
What was your family's reaction? I mean, your parents' reaction to all your wanderings, and then
Okay.
and then of all things becoming Catholic.
So that I would say different things. First of all, my grandfather was a Baptist minister in active ministry for 60 years. So probably no one blinked at becoming Baptist or something that sounded Baptist. And Anglican didn't sound too scary. But I don't think I ever really told my grandfather we became Catholic. He was like 97 years old at the time, and I just thought, I don't think I want to do this. But yeah, being very polite and very liberal mainstream Protestants, they weren't allowed to say too much, but I don't think they liked it. Yes.
When did your wife say, "Oh, not Catholic"? Or stop saying that?
When did she? Okay, so that's a good question. I was already feeling drawn towards the Catholic Church probably at least 5 years before we joined the church, and she just thought that was too far. That was too big a stretch. When we did more seriously consider it after being Anglican, she went away and she prayed and she thought about it. And when she came back, she said, "All right, I want to become Catholic, but you need to know I'm staying Catholic. Like, this is it. I made up my mind. I'm going to be Catholic. I'm not going anywhere else." So it was a free decision, and it was something that she firmly made on her own. And she has found tremendous riches in the Catholic Church, so she doesn't have regrets 20 years later. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so I still to this day, that my family wasn't perfect, and there are lots of good things in my family. But my mother was not the easiest person to get along with. So when someone points me to a mother, I have to kind of take a deep breath. I pray the rosary. I believe what the church believes about Mary. But from my heart, that's not the easiest place for me to go. I would be allergic to any kind of exaggerated things about Mary. The church has certain things we believe, and then sometimes in popular piety, people have gone a few steps beyond. I would find it very difficult to go beyond what the church says, but I recognize that to be a good Catholic, we need what the church teaches about Marian piety. So I guess I'm a little bit ambivalent, but just from my own pain, I find it hard to be extremely Marian from my heart. So I would be more attracted to other devotions. Does that make sense? But I definitely had to, as a Protestant, I had to unpack each step of that and come to understand, well, what does the Catholic Church teach? What do I understand? How could that be true? But I came to believe the things that the church believes, so I don't have a problem with anything that we believe. Yeah. Yes?
So did you marry the pretty farm girl?
I married an even prettier girl who wasn't a farm girl. But she didn't have a farm. So,
But those Mormon missionaries, it sounds like they're part of what got you here eventually. Starting on the road.
yeah, I think it's a lesson that God can take something that's bad and, in His grace, turn it into something that's good. And I don't know if I should share this or not, but I'm going to. Apparently they were having a terrible time in their mission activity at this particular campus. And I was like their one hopeful person. And they had encouraged me to get a journal and write down everything that happened. So I did. I wrote my whole story. Look, here's what I prayed. Here's what God said. Here's what happened. And then when they came to the door, I handed them my journal. I said, read this. I'm not becoming Mormon. And the journal eventually came back to me. But I heard from this lady later that they were so discouraged that they actually retreated and went back to Utah. And there were no Mormon missionaries for like 6 months. They just gave up. Anyways. But, yes.
I know that you were praying for Wendy, your beautiful wife, for a while.
Yes.
Well, for many, many months.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know whether everybody here had gotten an update.
Okay.
That was such a praise report to the Lord.
Yes.
So you could just give an update.
Okay. I'm not sure if you're aware, but unfortunately, my wife was diagnosed with brain cancer as well. But it's a stage 3 brain cancer that is much more hopeful. She's had 2 years of treatment. She had surgery. She had chemo. With this particular type of cancer, they did the chemo first, and then she had radiation. Up to this point, there's been no recurrence of the cancer. And so we're just, and that's wonderful, and that's great, but we're kind of in just a time of waiting to see what will happen. We're very hopeful, but we just don't know what's going to happen. So she's had several clear MRIs. The next one will be in June. But the doctors they're not willing to say that she's healed at this point. So, yeah. We had 5 children, and we lost our oldest, and we have 2 grandchildren and another grandchild on the way. So, yeah. I have one daughter who's away at college, but everyone else is living here in Kansas City. Yeah. So.
Okay, well, thank you, Deacon Scott, very
Thank
much.
you.